Long ago, in an age when the boundaries between kingdoms and wilderness were softer than they are today, there stretched beyond the walls of an ancient Indian city a vast and open plain. In the rainy season, the earth there became deep green. Tall grasses bent beneath the weight of silver dew. Small streams wandered between dark stones, and lotus ponds gathered quietly in the hollows of the land. When dawn came, mist rested close to the ground, turning the distant trees into pale shadows. And when the rains had passed, the grass slowly changed from green to gold. The wind moved across the plain in long, gentle waves. It was a peaceful country. And among all the creatures who lived there, none were more graceful than the deer. They moved across the wilderness in great herds, sometimes hundreds together, following the seasons from one grazing ground to another. At sunrise, they emerged from the shelter of the forest. At noon, they rested beneath broad trees. And when evening cooled the earth, they returned to the open grasslands to feed. The older deer knew every hidden spring. They knew which valleys remained green during the dry months, which plants were sweet, which berries were bitter, and which paths led safely through the forest. The young learned by following them. So generation after generation, the herd survived. Among them lived a gentle doe who would soon become a mother. Her body had grown heavy with the lives she carried within her, and because of this she no longer ran as swiftly as the others. Still, she remained with the herd. She walked when they walked. She rested when they rested, and each evening, when the sun disappeared beyond the distant hills, she would stand quietly beneath the darkening sky and feel the faint movements of her unborn young. 2 small lives. She did not yet know their faces. She had never heard their voices. But already she loved them. There are forms of love that begin only after we have known someone for many years. And there are forms of love that seem to exist before the first meeting. A mother's love may be like this. The doe asked nothing from the world except enough grass to eat, enough water to drink, and enough time to bring her young safely into the light. For many days, the wilderness gave her these things. Then, one morning, everything changed. Before sunrise, men gathered outside the gates of the royal city. Horses stamped against the earth. Leather harnesses creaked. Servants carried bows, arrows, spears, nets, and hunting horns. At their center rode the king. Hunting was one of his pleasures. When the affairs of the palace became tiresome, he liked to leave the walls of the city behind and ride into the wilderness with his attendants. That morning, the king wanted deer. So the hunters spread across the plain. Some rode ahead. Others entered the forest. Still others formed a wide circle, intending to drive the animals toward the king's position. For a while, the wilderness remained unaware of them. Birds called from the branches. Insects hummed among the grasses. The deer lowered their heads and fed beneath the pale morning sky. The pregnant doe stood near the edge of the herd. She was eating slowly when a strange sound reached her. Far away. Faint at first. A horn. She raised her head. The other deer heard it too. One by one, their ears turned toward the sound. Silence passed through the herd. Then came another horn. Closer. A flock of birds suddenly rose from the trees. And from somewhere beyond the grass came the pounding of horses. The oldest stag understood first. He leapt forward. The entire herd followed. In a single instant, the peaceful field became a storm of frightened bodies. Deer ran in every direction. Dust rose beneath their hooves. Branches snapped. Birds scattered into the sky. Behind them came the hunters. Their voices carried across the plain. The king's men shouted to one another, driving the animals toward the open ground. The doe ran with the others. At first, fear gave her strength. Her legs stretched beneath her, and the wind rushed past her ears. She followed the white flash of tails ahead of her and tried desperately not to lose sight of the herd. But she was carrying 2 unborn fawns. Her body could not endure what the others could. Soon her breathing became heavy. The herd moved farther ahead. She forced herself onward. One more step. Then another. The sound of the hunt seemed to fill the whole world. Hooves. Horns. Shouting. The pounding of her own heart. She crossed a shallow stream and climbed the opposite bank. By then, the herd was disappearing among the trees. She tried to call to them, but there was no answer. The distance widened. At last, she could run no farther. She turned away from the path of the hunters and stumbled into a thick grove where thorn bushes grew beneath ancient trees. There, hidden beneath hanging vines, she collapsed. For a long time she could do nothing but breathe. Her body trembled. The sounds of the hunt gradually moved farther away. The horns became faint. Then fainter still. Eventually, the forest grew quiet again. But the doe knew that something else had begun. The violent flight had brought the hour of birth upon her. Pain moved through her body. She tried to rise. She could not. So beneath the shelter of the trees, far from the herd and far from any creature she knew, the doe gave birth. First came one tiny fawn. Then another. For a moment, she simply stared at them. They were so small. Their coats were dark and soft, patterned with pale spots like fragments of moonlight scattered across the forest floor. Their legs trembled when they tried to move. Their eyes were wide with the astonishment of entering a world they did not yet understand. The mother lowered her head and gently cleaned them with her tongue. Again and again. Slowly. patiently. Outside the grove, the wind moved through the leaves. The hunt had passed. The forest had survived another morning. And beneath those dark trees, 2 new lives had begun. The doe forgot her exhaustion. She forgot the terror of the horns. She forgot the men who had chased her. For that brief moment, there were only her children. The first fawn struggled to stand. Its thin legs folded beneath it. It tried again. And fell again. The mother touched its back with her nose. The second watched, then attempted the same uncertain movement. Soon both were standing. Not steadily. Not confidently. But standing. The doe looked at them with tenderness. Yet beneath her joy there was uneasiness. They had been born far from the herd. There were no older deer nearby to guide them. No familiar grazing ground. No safe path that she could follow without thought. And newborn fawns knew nothing of danger. They did not know which scent belonged to a tiger. They did not know which plants could be eaten. They did not know where water gathered when the sun became hot. They did not even understand why they must sometimes remain perfectly still. Everything had to be taught. And until they learned, their lives depended entirely upon her. So the mother stayed close. During the first days, she rarely left the grove. When the fawns slept, she watched them. When they woke, she fed them. When a branch cracked somewhere in the distance, her ears rose immediately. At night, she placed herself between her children and the open forest. The little ones soon began to follow her. They learned the smell of their mother. They learned the sound of her steps. They learned that when she moved, they should move. And when she froze, they should become still. But the doe herself was growing weak. Birth had exhausted her, and there was little grass inside the hidden grove. She needed food. Without food, she could not produce enough milk. Without milk, the fawns would weaken. One morning, when the first light entered between the trees, she made a decision. She would leave the fawns hidden beneath the bushes and search for fresh grass nearby. She touched each of them gently. Then she stepped away. The 2 little deer immediately tried to follow. The mother turned back and nudged them toward the shelter. Again they came after her. Again she returned them. At last they remained beneath the leaves, watching her with dark, innocent eyes. The doe walked into the forest. She intended to be gone only a short while. There was no reason to think that this morning would be different from any other. She found a narrow path. Beyond it grew fresh grass. She ate quickly. Then she moved farther toward the smell of water. The forest was quiet. Almost too quiet. She did not notice the leaves carefully arranged across the ground. She did not smell the faint scent of human hands that had touched the earth hours before. She took one step, then another, and suddenly the ground seized her. A hidden snare tightened around her leg. The doe leapt in terror. The rope pulled tighter. She struggled. The more she fought, the more firmly the trap held her. Dry leaves scattered beneath her hooves. She twisted, pulled, kicked. Nothing changed. Then she stopped. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She looked toward the forest behind her. Somewhere beyond those trees, two newborn fawns were waiting. They did not know where she had gone. They did not know how to find water. They did not know how to survive without her. And for the first time that morning, the doe understood what the trap truly meant. It was not only her life that had been caught. 3 lives were now bound to the same rope. Far away, footsteps approached through the forest. Slow, heavy, human. The hunter was coming. And beneath the trees, the mother deer lowered her head and listened as each step drew nearer. The footsteps came closer. The doe could hear dry leaves breaking beneath the hunter's sandals. There was no longer any reason to struggle. The rope had already cut into her leg, and every movement only tightened the knot. So she stood quietly beneath the trees, her body trembling, her eyes fixed on the path from which the sound was coming. A man appeared between the branches. He carried a bough across his shoulder and a knife at his waist. The moment he saw the trapped deer, his face brightened. His snare had worked. To him, this was simply a fortunate morning. He approached without hurry, expecting the animal to throw itself against the rope again. But the doe did not struggle. She only watched him. The hunter stopped beside her. He examined the snare, then reached for the knife at his belt. At the soft sound of metal leaving its sheath, the doe understood. Death had come. Yet the first thought that entered her heart was not fear for herself. It was the image of 2 small fawns waiting beneath the bushes. Perhaps they were already standing. Perhaps they were listening for her footsteps. Perhaps one of them had begun to wander toward the place where she had disappeared. The doe suddenly pulled against the rope. The hunter frowned. "Be still," he muttered. But she could not. Not because she wished to escape death. Because she had left 2 lives unfinished behind her. She lowered her head before the hunter. Then, with tears gathering in her eyes, she pleaded, "Please do not kill me yet." The hunter froze. In the ancient stories, there were times when human beings understood the voices of animals, and times when compassion allowed one heart to understand another even without ordinary speech. Whatever the reason, the hunter understood her. He stared at the doe. She continued. "I know that I have fallen into your trap. I know that according to the custom of hunters, my life now belongs to you. I will not ask you to surrender what you believe is yours." The hunter tightened his grip on the knife. "Then what do you ask?" "Only a little time." The hunter laughed. "A trapped deer asks a hunter for time?" The doe lowered herself as far as the rope allowed. "I gave birth only a few days ago. 2 fawns are hidden in the forest. They are so young that they cannot yet distinguish a safe path from a dangerous one. They do not know where water lies. They do not know which grass will nourish them and which plants will harm them." Her voice trembled. "They are waiting for me." The hunter said nothing. The doe continued. "Let me return to them once." "Once? Only once? What would you do?" "I would lead them to water. I would show them the grazing ground. I would teach them where they may hide when danger comes. I would settle them somewhere safe." She paused. "And then I would say farewell." The hunter looked at her as though she had spoken nonsense. "You expect me to release you?" "Yes." "And after I release you, you expect me to believe that you will return?" "Yes." The hunter laughed again, louder this time. He had spent much of his life in forests. He knew frightened animals. He knew how a deer struggled when trapped, how a boar fought when cornered, how birds beat their wings bloody against nets. Every creature wanted life. That was the oldest law he knew. "You will run," he said. "I will return." No creature returns willingly to the knife. "I will." The hunter shook his head. "Even men break promises when their lives are at stake. Kings break promises. Merchants break promises for profit. Friends abandon friends when fear enters their hearts. And you are asking me to believe that a wild animal will leave a trap and then come back to die?" The doe looked at him. "I cannot speak for kings." The hunter's smile faded slightly. "I cannot speak for merchants. I cannot speak for those who abandon their friends. I can speak only for myself." "And you say you will return?" "I give you my word." The hunter turned the knife in his hand. "What is the word of a deer worth?" The doe closed her eyes. For a moment, neither moved. Wind passed through the trees. Somewhere high above them, a bird called once and became silent. Then the doe spoke again. "If I wished only to live, I would promise anything." The hunter looked at her. "But I do not ask you to spare my life. I ask only to delay my death." Her words were quiet now. "My children were born because I carried them into this world. Until they can stand safely within it, I have a duty toward them." The hunter frowned. "Duty?" "Yes. They are dear. They are my children. Something in the simplicity of the answer made the hunter silent. The doe continued, "They do not understand death. They do not understand why a mother leaves and does not return. If you kill me now, they will wait." She looked toward the distant grove. "They will wait until hunger becomes stronger than patience." Her voice softened. "Then they will come looking for me." The hunter imagined two tiny fawns stepping uncertainly through the forest. The doe went on. "They may drink from foul water. They may eat poisonous leaves. They may wander onto an open path where another hunter sees them. They may call for me until a leopard hears their voices." Her eyes filled with tears. "You may take my life. But if you keep me here now, perhaps 2 other lives will disappear with mine." The hunter looked away. He had killed many animals. He had rarely thought about what remained after an animal died. To a hunter, a deer appeared in the forest and then became meat, hide, bone, or coin. He did not usually ask whether another creature waited for it somewhere beyond the trees. But now the doe had placed those unseen lives before him. Still, suspicion remained stronger than pity. "You speak cleverly," he said. "Fear can make even a beast clever." The doe answered, "Then bind me more tightly if you wish. Mark me so you will know me. Take anything from me as a pledge." The hunter laughed bitterly. "What pledge can a deer give? My promise. That is exactly what I do not trust." The doe lowered her head again. "Then hear my oath." The forest seemed to become still. "If I leave this place and forget my promise because I desire to continue living, may the weight of that falsehood follow me wherever I go." The hunter watched her. "If I abandon the word I give you today, may every safe road become difficult beneath my feet. May every clear stream remind me that my heart became unclean." Her voice grew stronger. "If I preserve my own body by betraying truth, then what kind of life would I have preserved?" The hunter's expression changed. The doe looked directly at him. "A body can remain alive while something within it has already died." The hunter said nothing. "I would rather return and lose my life than escape and lose the truth within me." For the first time, the hunter lowered his knife. But only slightly. "You speak of truth as though truth will feed your children after you are dead." "No." "Then why return?" "Because love does not excuse dishonesty." The answer surprised him. The doe continued, "If I break my word because I love my children, then I teach them with my final act that fear is stronger than truth." Her tears fell onto the leaves. "I want them to live. More than anything, I want them to live. That is why I am begging you." She took a slow breath. "But I do not want their lives to be purchased by a lie." The hunter stared at her for a long time. Everything he knew told him not to trust her. A snare released was an empty snare. An animal freed was an animal lost. And yet there was something strange about the doe's fear. She was clearly terrified, but her terror was not centered upon the knife. It was centered somewhere far away, on two young creatures she could no longer see. The hunter crouched beside the rope. The doe became completely still. His hand touched the knot, then stopped. "If I release you," he said, "how long will you be gone?" "Only long enough to prepare them." "How will I know you have not fled?" "You will not." "How will I know you have not joined your herd?" "You will not." "How will I know you have not crossed the river and disappeared?" "You will not." The hunter looked up sharply. "Then you give me nothing." The doe answered, "I give you the only thing I possess that cannot be tied with rope. My word." The hunter remained crouched beside the snare. For many breaths, he did not move. Then he began to loosen the knot. The doe stared at him. Slowly, the pressure around her leg disappeared. The rope fell onto the leaves. She was free. She could have run. Every instinct in her body told her to run. The open forest stood before her. No rope. No cage. No wall. The hunter remained close enough to seize his bow, but for one extraordinary moment, the path to life was completely open. The doe took one step. Then she turned back. She bowed her head toward the hunter. "I will return." The hunter stood. "Go." The doe ran. She ran through the trees as quickly as her wounded leg allowed. The hunter watched until her body disappeared among the shadows. Then the forest became empty. He looked down at the loose rope. Almost immediately, doubt entered his mind. What have I done? He had released his catch because of words. Words spoken by a deer. He imagined telling the other hunters. They would laugh at him. He imagined waiting until sunset. Then darkness. Then another morning. Of course she would not return. Why would she? Freedom lay before her. Her children were waiting. The herd might still be somewhere beyond the hills. Any living creature would choose life. The hunter sat beneath a tree and placed the knife beside him. He told himself that he would wait only a little while. Then he would leave. But somewhere deep within him, a question had already begun to grow. What if she returned? And far away, beyond the trees, the mother deer was running toward her children. Not away from death. Only toward the farewell she had promised herself she would finish. And with every step, the place of her execution waited silently behind her. The doe ran through the forest with a pain that was greater than the wound in her leg. Branches brushed against her body. Dry leaves broke beneath her hooves. The path she had followed earlier now seemed longer than before, as though the forest itself understood that every step carried her closer to a farewell. She knew she had little time. The hunter had trusted her. That trust had become a weight she could feel with every breath. She could not delay. She could not wander. She could not allow love to become an excuse for breaking her word. Yet as she came closer to the hidden grove where her fawns were waiting, another force pulled against that promise. A mother's heart wanted to stop time. It wanted one more morning. One more feeding. One more night with both young bodies curled beside her. But time does not become merciful simply because we are not ready. The doe emerged from the trees. At once, two small shapes stirred beneath the bushes. The fawns had been waiting exactly where she had left them. When they saw her, they sprang awkwardly to their feet. Their legs were still uncertain. Their movements still clumsy, but their joy was immediate. They ran toward her. One pressed its head beneath her chest. The other pushed against her side. The doe lowered her head and licked them again and again. For a few moments, she allowed herself to forget everything. She smelled the warmth of their fur. She listened to their tiny breaths. She felt their bodies leaning into hers. This was what she had returned for. And because this was what she had returned for, it was also what she would have to leave. The first fawn stepped back and looked at her injured leg. The rope had left a dark mark. There was blood along the fur. The little animal did not understand what had happened, but it knew that something was wrong. It touched the wound with its nose. The doe pulled her leg away gently. "No," she whispered. The fawn looked up. There are moments when children understand sorrow before they understand its cause. The two young deer sensed something different in their mother. She was close to them, but her mind seemed to be standing somewhere far away. She kept looking toward the forest. She kept listening. And each time the wind moved through the leaves, her body became still. The doe knew she could not begin with farewell. Not yet. First, she had to teach. "Come," she said. The fawns followed. She led them out of the grove. Slowly this time. Not along the path where the trap had been hidden, but toward another part of the forest where the ground was softer and the trees grew farther apart. She showed them a patch of tender grass. "This grass is good." The fawns lowered their heads and smelled it. One tried to bite too much at once. The doe nudged it gently. Slowly. Then she led them farther. She stopped beside a plant with broad, dark leaves. "Do not eat this." The fawns looked at it. "It may look green when everything else is dry, but it can make you sick." They could not understand every word, but they watched her carefully. They were learning the way young animals learn best. By following. By remembering. By trusting. The doe moved on. She showed them a place where water collected beneath stones. This spring remains even when the smaller pools disappear. She drank. The fawns drank beside her. Their noses touched the surface. Ripples spread outward. For a brief instant, 3 deer were reflected together in the dark water. The doe looked at that reflection. She wished she could hold it there forever. But the water moved. Their shapes broke apart. She turned away. Remember this place. The fawns followed her again. She took them to a thick patch of reeds. If you hear danger and I am not with you, come here. One of the fawns looked back at her. The doe continued. Do not run unless you must. Sometimes stillness protects better than speed. She stepped into the reeds and lowered her body. The fawns imitated her. Their pale spots disappeared among the broken light and shadow. Good. Then she rose. She showed them how to stand downwind when they wanted to smell what was ahead. She showed them how to listen before crossing open ground. She showed them which path led toward the larger herd's usual grazing place. She showed them the distant line of trees where older deer sometimes rested in the afternoon. Every lesson was simple. Every lesson was necessary. And with every lesson, the mother felt the remaining time become smaller. At last, the sun had risen higher. The forest was warmer. The doe knew she could delay no longer. She led the fawns to a quiet meadow where grass grew thick between low bushes. There was water nearby. There was cover. And if fortune was kind, other deer would eventually pass through. The doe stopped. The fawns stopped with her. For a while, none of them moved. Then the mother lowered herself and began licking the first fawn's head. Slowly. Carefully. As though she wanted to memorize the shape of it. Then she turned to the second. Again and again she passed her tongue across its forehead and neck. The fawns enjoyed the attention. They pressed closer. The doe closed her eyes. Her chest tightened. She had faced the hunter's knife without collapsing. But this was harder. She could stand before death. She did not know if she could stand before her children's trust. The first fawn lay down. The second curled beside it. They expected their mother to rest with them. Instead, she remained standing. One fawn lifted its head. The doe spoke. "My little ones." Her voice was soft. "I have shown you where to drink." The fawns watched her. "I have shown you what to eat." She swallowed. "I have shown you where to hide." The second fawn rose again and stepped closer. The mother touched its face. "You must remember." The fawn leaned against her. The doe looked toward the sky. The blue above the trees seemed enormous. Unmoved. Indifferent. She had known, as all creatures know in some hidden way, that life does not last. But knowing is different from leaving. She said, everything that is born must one day part from what it loves. The fawns did not understand. Still, they listened. Morning dew shines beautifully. She looked toward the grass. But when the sun rises, it disappears. A flower opens. Then its petals fall. A cloud gathers. Then the wind carries it away. She lowered her head. Life is like this. The words were not only for them. They were also for herself. We meet. We love. We stay together for a while. Then one day, we separate. The first fawn stood. It walked toward her. The mother stepped back. The fawn followed. She stepped back again. The fawn followed again. The doe's eyes filled with tears. She turned away. The two young deer immediately moved after her. No. They stopped. She faced them. Stay here. The fawns looked confused. One gave a small cry. The sound pierced her more deeply than the snare had. The doe nearly returned to them. Nearly. But behind that cry she remembered another sound. The hunter loosening the rope. His hand releasing the knot. The word she had given. I must go. The fawns began to follow. The mother turned sharply. Stay. They stopped again. For a moment. Then, as she began to walk, they followed once more. Their small hooves struck the earth behind her. One cried. Then the other. The doe kept walking. The cries came closer. At last, she turned. Her voice became stern. Go back. The fawns froze. They had never heard that tone from her before. The mother had always called them softly. Always guided them gently. Now her voice cut through the forest. Go back. One fawn lowered its head. The other trembled. The doe hated herself for frightening them. But she knew kindness could become cruelty if it allowed them to follow her to death. She took a step toward them. Not enough to embrace them. Only enough to make them listen. You must live. The fawns stared at her. You must eat. You must drink. You must hide when danger comes. You must find the herd. Her voice broke. You must live. The first fawn cried again. The second stepped toward her. The mother backed away. No. Tears ran down her face. If you love me, do not follow me. The fawns could not understand the words, but they understood the distance she was creating. They began to cry together. The doe turned away. She walked. The cries followed. She did not turn. A few steps. Then more. Her entire body begged her to look back. At last, she did. The two fawns stood where she had left them. Small. Alone. Both watching her. The mother stared at them from between the trees. She wanted to run back. She wanted to break every promise. She wanted to gather them close and disappear into the mountains. For one heartbeat, she imagined it. A river crossed before sunrise. A hidden valley. A new herd. Days becoming months. The fawns growing strong. Perhaps no hunter would ever find them. The possibility was so beautiful that it hurt. Then she remembered what she had said, "If I preserve my body by betraying truth, what kind of life would I have preserved?" The doe closed her eyes. When she opened them, the fawns were still there. She bowed her head toward them. A farewell they could not understand. Then she turned and entered the forest. This time she did not look back. Behind her, the cries slowly faded. Ahead of her waited the place where she had promised to die. And somewhere between those two places, the mother walked alone. Not because she loved life too little, but because she loved truth enough to return. The mother deer walked alone. Behind her, the cries of the two fawns had finally faded into the distance. Ahead of her, the forest seemed darker than before. Nothing had changed. The same trees stood where they had always stood. The same wind moved through the leaves. The same streams crossed the same stones. Yet the world no longer felt the same. When she had run this way earlier, she had been a mother trying to save her children. Now she was a creature walking back toward her own death. Every sound felt sharper. A bird moving in the branches. The soft fall of a dry leaf. The low hum of insects. Even the faint whisper of grass beneath her hooves seemed to remind her that she was still alive. And because she knew that life might soon end, every ordinary thing became precious. She stopped beside a narrow stream. The water was clear. For a moment, she watched it move around the stones. She could have followed that stream. It flowed toward a valley far from the hunter. Beyond the valley were hills. Beyond those hills, perhaps another forest. If she crossed enough distance before sunset, perhaps no human would ever find her. The thought entered her mind without permission. It was not cowardice. It was simply the instinct of life. The body wishes to remain. The lungs wish to keep breathing. The heart wishes to continue beating. And memory gives life reasons to stay. the warm fur of her fawns, their uncertain first steps, their small bodies sleeping beside her, the way they had cried when she walked away. For a few breaths, the doe stood beside the stream. No rope held her now. No hunter watched her. No one would know if she turned away. No one except herself. She lowered her head and drank. The cool water touched her tongue. Then she lifted her head. "I promised." The words were barely louder than the stream. She continued walking. The wound around her leg had begun to stiffen. Each step brought pain. But she did not slow. Sometimes the forest opened into bright patches of sun. Sometimes the path disappeared beneath roots and fallen branches. Once, she heard the distant roar of a predator and froze. A strange thought came to her. If a tiger killed her now, then she would never reach the hunter. Would that mean she had broken her promise? The idea troubled her. She waited. The sound did not come again. Then she moved on. Her mind had become very clear. There are times when fear fills the heart with confusion. And there are times when death stands so close that unnecessary thoughts simply fall away. The doe understood that she no longer possessed the future. She had only this path, this breath, this step, and the truth she had chosen to keep. After some time, she reached the place where the forest floor became familiar. She saw the broken branch near the trap. Then the tree beneath which the hunter had sat. The clearing appeared ahead. The hunter was still there. He had not expected to see her so soon. In truth, he had begun to believe he would never see her again. At first he had waited with impatience. He told himself that the deer had deceived him. Then impatience became anger. He imagined her running farther and farther away. He imagined her joining the herd. He cursed himself for being foolish. But beneath that anger was something else. Disappointment. He had wanted, for reasons he could not explain, to discover that the doe's words had been true. Perhaps because if an animal could keep such a promise, then the world might contain more honor than he had believed. He sat beneath the tree, turning a twig between his fingers. The sun had moved higher. He looked toward the path again. Nothing. He almost stood to leave. Then he heard footsteps. Light. Uneven. Slow. He looked up. The doe emerged from the trees. For several moments, the hunter did not move. He simply stared. She was there. The same deer. The wound around her leg was still visible. Her body was dusty from the journey. Her eyes were wet. But she had returned. The hunter rose slowly. The twig fell from his hand. "You came back." The doe stopped before him. Yes. The hunter looked behind her. No one. No other deer. No hidden trick. Only the mother. You truly came back. Yes. Why? The doe answered as though the question had only one possible answer. Because I said I would. The hunter stepped closer. He examined her face. Did you see your young? Yes. Did you feed them? Yes. Did you show them water? Yes. Did you leave them somewhere safe? As safe as I could. The hunter's expression became uneasy. And they let you go? The doe lowered her eyes. They did not understand. The hunter was silent. The doe continued. They followed me. A faint tremor passed through her voice. I had to send them back. The hunter looked away. For the first time, he imagined not merely the fawns waiting, but the mother turning away from them. He imagined the cries behind her. He imagined the path she had walked. You could have stayed. Yes. You could have run. Yes. You could have hidden in the mountains. Yes. And yet you returned here. Yes. The hunter looked at the knife beside him. It seemed different now. Before, it had been only a tool. Now it seemed to accuse him. The doe stepped toward the place where she had been trapped. She stood beside the loose rope. I have returned as promised. The hunter did not answer. My children have been shown what they need to know. Still no answer. I am ready. The hunter looked at her sharply. Ready? To die. The word struck him harder than he expected. The doe lowered herself to the ground. Not in defeat. Not because her strength had failed. She simply made herself still. She stretched her neck slightly. Then closed her eyes. The hunter's hand moved toward the knife. But stopped. The forest seemed completely silent. He could hear his own breathing. The doe waited. Seconds passed. Then more. At last she opened her eyes. The hunter was still standing. What are you waiting for? She asked. He did not know how to answer. He had killed deer before. Many. Some had struggled until the end. Some had screamed. Some had tried to crawl away even after being wounded. He had learned not to look too closely at their eyes. But this deer had returned by choice. She had walked out of freedom and back into death. Something about that made the act before him feel entirely different. The hunter sat down slowly. I do not understand you. The doe remained where she was. You value your word more than your life? The doe answered, If a word is worth nothing when keeping it becomes difficult, then it was never truly a promise. The hunter frowned. But life is everything. No. The answer came quietly. The hunter looked at her. Life is precious. The doe continued. That is why I wish to return to my children. She paused. But there are things that give life its worth. Truth. Compassion. Duty. Love. She looked at him. If we destroy all of these simply to preserve the body, then we may remain alive, but we become poorer than death. The hunter lowered his eyes. He had never heard words like these from a teacher. Certainly not from a deer. The doe said, "You showed me compassion when you released me. I am here because I did not want your compassion to become something foolish." The hunter looked up. What do you mean? If I had run away, then perhaps the next creature who begged you for mercy would receive none. The hunter's face changed. The doe continued, "You might remember me and say, 'I trusted once, and I was deceived.'" She breathed slowly. "I did not want my children to live because another heart had been taught never to trust again." The hunter stared at her. For the first time since she returned, he felt ashamed. He had thought only of whether she would cheat him of his prey. She had thought of whether her actions might make him less compassionate in the future. The hunter sat for a long time. Then he asked, "Were you not afraid every step of the way back?" "Yes." "Did you not regret your promise?" "Yes." "Did you not want to turn away?" "Yes." The hunter seemed surprised. The doe looked at him. "Courage is not the absence of fear," she said. "It is walking while fear walks beside you." The hunter's eyes fell again to the knife. He picked it up. The doe closed her eyes. The blade flashed once in the weak forest light. Then the hunter turned and drove the knife into the rope. He cut the snare apart. The doe opened her eyes. The hunter threw the broken rope onto the ground. "I cannot kill you." The doe stared at him. "You returned." His voice had become rough. "You returned when every law of survival told you not to." He shook his head. "If I kill you now, then I am lower than the beast I thought I had trapped." The doe did not move. The hunter stood. "No." He looked toward the path leading back to the royal lands. "This is no longer only a matter between a hunter and a deer." The doe watched him. "What do you mean?" "I must tell the king." The doe's body tensed. The hunter noticed. "You fear him?" "I fear what men with weapons may do." The hunter nodded slowly. "That is why he must hear this." He looked at her again. "A creature has kept faith better than many men. If the king has wisdom, he should know." The doe remained uncertain. The hunter continued, "I will not bind you. I will not force you. But if you come with me, I will speak for you." The mother deer looked back toward the forest, toward the place where her children waited. Then she looked at the hunter. A new path had opened. She had returned expecting death. Instead, her promise had changed the heart of the man who held the knife. What would happen next, she could not know. But she understood one thing. A kept promise does not always end where we expect. Sometimes truth, carried far enough, enters another heart. And once it enters, the world cannot remain exactly as it was before. The hunter did not lead the doe by rope. That mattered. He walked several steps ahead, then looked back from time to time to make sure she was still following. And every time he looked, the mother deer was there. Not because she had been captured again. Not because there was a weapon at her throat. But because she had chosen to continue. Together, they left the deeper forest and moved toward the road that led to the royal city. The land gradually changed around them. Wild grass gave way to cultivated fields. Scattered trees became rows of planted groves. In the distance, smoke rose from village kitchens. Farmers bent over the earth. Children carried bundles of grass. Women walked toward wells with clay jars balanced against their hips. At first, no one paid much attention to the hunter. Men with bows often passed along these roads. But then someone noticed the deer. A living doe was walking calmly behind him. No rope. No cage. No arrow wound. No struggling. A boy stopped in the middle of the road. "Look." Another child turned. Soon several villagers were watching. The hunter felt their eyes. He almost wished he had tied the doe simply to avoid questions. But he remembered the broken snare on the forest floor. No. If he bound her now, he would turn trust back into captivity. So he kept walking. The mother deer followed. Whispers moved through the road behind them. Why does she not run? Is she trained? Did he tame her? Perhaps she is injured. Perhaps she belongs to the king. The hunter answered none of them. He had not yet decided how to explain what had happened. The truth sounded too strange. He himself had barely believed it while living through it. How could he tell another man, "I caught a deer"? She asked to visit her newborn young. I released her. She promised to return. And she returned. The words sounded like something from an old tale told beside a fire. Yet the deer walking behind him was real. By the time they reached the outer gates of the city, a small crowd had formed. The guards lowered their spears. One of them laughed. "You have forgotten how hunting works." The hunter frowned. What? You are supposed to bring the animal dead. The other guards laughed. The hunter did not. I need to see the king. That silenced them. For what? For this deer. One guard looked at the doe. She stole your purse. A few men laughed again. The hunter stepped closer. I am serious. Something in his face changed the guard's expression. What happened? I will tell the king. The guards looked at one another. A hunter could not simply walk into the royal court whenever he wished. But the growing crowd had already drawn attention, and the sight of a wild deer standing quietly beside the city gate was unusual enough to travel quickly. Soon an officer arrived. The hunter repeated his request. The officer examined the doe. She stood calmly, though the sounds and smells of the city frightened her. Never before had she been so close to human walls. Carts rolled over stone. Metal struck metal. Merchants called from stalls. Dogs barked. People crowded near. The doe's instinct told her to flee. But she remembered the hunter's words. If the king has wisdom, he should know. She remained. The officer finally said, "You may enter." The hunter nodded. They passed through the gate. The mother deer entered the human city. Everywhere, people stopped. Some pointed. Some laughed. Some stared in silence. Others followed. The hunter's unease grew. He feared the crowd might frighten her away. But each time he looked back, she was still there. At last, they reached the palace. The gates were higher than the forest trees. Golden ornaments shone above carved doors. Soldiers stood in rows. Servants moved through courtyards. The doe had never seen anything like it. To her, the palace seemed less like a home than a mountain built by men. Inside, word had already reached the king. A hunter had come requesting audience because of a living deer that followed him freely. The king was curious. He had hunted deer many times. He knew they fled at the smallest danger. So he ordered the hunter brought before him. The royal hall was wide and cool. Tall pillars rose toward a painted ceiling. Officials stood on both sides. Ministers waited near the throne. The hunter entered and bowed deeply. Behind him came the doe. A murmur passed through the hall. The king leaned forward. "Is this the deer?" "Yes, Majesty." "And she is not bound?" "No." "Then why has she not fled?" The hunter looked at the mother deer. "That is why I came." The king gestured. "Speak." The hunter took a breath. Then he told the story. He described the snare, the wounded leg, the knife, the doe's plea. He repeated her request to return to 2 newborn fawns. He told the king how he had laughed. How he had said that even human beings failed to keep promises when death stood before them. How the doe had sworn to come back. How she had said that preserving the body through falsehood would not be true life. The court grew quieter. The hunter continued. I released her. Several ministers exchanged glances. One whispered, "Foolish." The king heard. He did not respond. The hunter went on. I believed she would flee. Did she? The king asked. The hunter looked toward the doe. No. He described waiting beneath the tree. His anger. His doubt. Then the sound of footsteps. The mother returning alone. He told them how she had stood beside the broken snare. How she had said, I have returned as promised. The hall became completely still. The king looked at the deer. Is this true? The doe raised her head. It is. A minister stepped forward. Majesty, this is absurd. The king glanced at him. Why? An animal cannot understand moral duty in the way a human does. The hunter's jaw tightened. The minister continued, perhaps the deer returned because her path circled back. Perhaps she was confused. Perhaps this hunter has invented the whole affair. The hunter flushed. I have not. The minister waved a hand. A man embarrassed after losing his prey might invent anything. The doe remained still. The king studied her. Then he asked, why did you return? The mother deer answered, because I had given my word. The minister laughed softly. The king did not. He asked another question. Did you want to return? The doe was silent for a moment. No. A few people shifted. The king's eyes narrowed. You did not? I wanted to stay with my children. Her voice was calm. I wanted to take them far away. I wanted to live. The king watched her closely. Then why come back? The doe answered, because wanting to live does not erase what is right. A murmur passed through the court. The king leaned back. He had heard priests speak about virtue. He had heard philosophers speak about truth. He had heard officials praise loyalty. But these lessons often became smaller when comfort was threatened. Here stood a creature who had possessed every reason to run. And yet she had returned. The king asked, what did your young do when you left? The mother deer's eyes changed. They followed me. The king's expression softened. I sent them back. Was that difficult? The doe looked toward the floor. It was more difficult than returning to the knife. No one laughed now. The minister who had doubted her said nothing. The king remained silent for a long time. Then he stood. Everyone in the hall bowed. The king descended from the throne and walked closer to the deer. He noticed the wound around her leg. He noticed the dried blood. He saw that she was exhausted. "You were prepared to die?" "Yes." "For a promise made to a hunter?" "For a promise made by me." The king stopped. The distinction struck him. Not for the hunter. Not because the hunter was powerful. Not because the law demanded it. She had returned because she refused to make herself false. The king looked around the court. Many men stood before him dressed in fine cloth. Some wore gold. Some held offices. Some had studied sacred texts. Yet he wondered how many of them would walk willingly back toward death merely to keep a promise no one could force them to keep. The thought unsettled him. The mother deer spoke again. "Great king, I did not come here to accuse anyone." The king looked at her. The hunter showed mercy. She continued. He trusted what he had no reason to trust. And because he did, my children had time to learn how to survive. The hunter lowered his eyes. The doe said, "If there is merit in what happened, some belongs to him." The court turned toward the hunter. He looked embarrassed. The king asked, "Why did you spare her after she returned?" The hunter answered slowly, "Because when she came back, I understood that killing her would make me smaller than the creature I had trapped." The king studied him. Then he looked again at the doe. Something had changed in the room. At first, they had all been curious about a strange animal. Now the king understood that the deer had not come merely to entertain the court with an unusual story. She had carried a question into the palace. What is honor worth if we demand it from others but abandon it ourselves? What is compassion worth if we reserve it only for those like us? And what kind of ruler praises virtue while permitting needless fear across his own land? The king turned toward the open doors of the hall. Beyond them lay forests where royal hunts regularly scattered the herds. Forests where traps waited beneath leaves. Forests where young animals might wait for mothers who never returned. For the first time, he imagined the hunt from the other side. Not as sport. Not as victory. But as terror moving through grass. He returned his gaze to the doe. "What would you ask of me?" The hall held its breath. The mother deer did not ask for gold. She did not ask for vengeance against the hunter. She did not even ask only for her own life. She bowed her head. And when she spoke, her answer would reach far beyond the fate of one mother and two waiting fawns. The king remained standing before the doe. Around him, ministers, guards, servants, and court officials waited in silence. No one knew what she would ask. Perhaps she would beg for her own life. Perhaps she would ask the king to punish the hunter. Perhaps she would ask for protection for the two fawns waiting somewhere beyond the city walls. All of these requests would have been understandable. The king himself expected something of this kind. But the doe lifted her head and spoke slowly. "Great king, if you wish to grant me mercy, do not grant it only to me." The hall became very still. The king frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The mother deer looked toward the open doors of the palace. Beyond them lay the roads. Beyond the roads, the fields. Beyond the fields, the forests. "My life is small," she said. "If you spare me today, I will return to my children. I will be grateful." She paused. "But tomorrow, another deer may fall into a snare." The hunter lowered his eyes. "Another mother may be carrying young. Another fawn may wait beneath a tree. Another herd may be scattered by horses and horns." The king did not interrupt. The doe continued, "If your mercy ends with me, then only one creature has been fortunate." She looked directly at him. "But if you have truly understood what happened, then let that understanding reach farther than my body." A murmur moved quietly through the court. The king asked, "What are you asking?" The doe bowed her head. "I ask that the deer of your kingdom no longer be hunted for pleasure." Several ministers looked up sharply. The request had crossed a boundary. This was no longer a private act of mercy. It touched royal custom. Royal hunting was old. Kings hunted to display skill, strength, and courage. Nobles hunted beside them. Guests were entertained with hunting parties. Meat from the forest filled royal kitchens. Some officials exchanged uneasy glances. One minister stepped forward. "Majesty, this is too much." The king looked at him. The minister continued, "To spare one unusual deer is generosity. To forbid hunting throughout the kingdom is another matter." Another minister agreed. "The forests belong to the crown." A third said, "Hunting has always been permitted." The mother deer listened. The king turned back to her. "You understand what you are asking?" "Yes." "You ask me to change a custom practiced by kings before me?" "Yes." "Because of one event?" The doe answered, "Not because of one event." The king waited. "Because the event revealed something that was already true." No one spoke. The doe said, "Before today, deer already feared the horn. Fawns already lost mothers. Animals already struggled in traps. The difference is only that now, one of those lives has stood before you long enough to be seen." The words settled over the court. The king's face became serious. The doe continued, "Suffering does not begin when a king notices it." Several ministers lowered their eyes. "It was there before." The hunter stared at the floor. He knew the truth of that better than most. He had set snares for years. He remembered deer dragging wounded legs. He remembered animals crying through the night. He remembered finding traps empty except for blood. Until now, those memories had been part of work. Nothing more. But the doe had changed the meaning of them. The king slowly returned to his throne. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he stood beside it and looked at the court. One of the elder ministers spoke carefully. "Majesty, compassion is admirable. But a kingdom cannot be ruled by emotion alone." The king nodded. "That is true." The minister seemed relieved. Then the king added, "But neither should a kingdom be ruled by habit alone." The minister fell silent. The king sat. He looked at the doe. "If I forbid all hunting of deer, what of farmers whose crops are damaged?" The question was practical. The doe answered without hesitation. "Protect the fields." "How?" "Build barriers. Guard the edges. Drive the animals away without killing when it is possible." "And when it is not possible?" The doe was silent for a moment. "I ask only that death not be the first answer." The king leaned back. This answer pleased him because it was not foolishly simple. The doe was not saying that humans should abandon their fields. She was asking whether power must always begin with killing. The king asked, "And what of hunger? If a family has no food and takes an animal to survive?" The doe replied, "Hunger is not the same as sport." The court grew quiet again. The king watched her carefully. "So you distinguish necessity from pleasure?" "Yes." "And yet you still ask me to protect the deer?" "Yes." "Why deer alone?" The question surprised some in the hall. The doe lowered her eyes. "I am a deer. That is the life I know." Then she raised her head. "But if your compassion grows beyond deer, would not oppose it?" A few people smiled faintly. Even the king did. But the smile disappeared quickly. He understood what she was saying. A creature begins from the suffering it knows. Wisdom is allowing that understanding to widen. The king looked toward the hunter. "You." The hunter stepped forward. "Yes, Majesty." "How many animals have you killed?" The hunter hesitated. "I do not know." "How long have you hunted?" "Since I was young." "Why?" "To live." "Only to live?" The hunter lowered his head. "No." The hall was silent. The king waited. The hunter continued, "Sometimes for money. Sometimes because nobles paid. Sometimes because it was simply what I knew how to do." The king asked, "And sometimes for pleasure?" The hunter swallowed. Yes. The king did not shame him. Instead, he asked, "When you released this doe, what changed?" The hunter looked at the mother deer. "I saw the animal before me as someone waiting to be killed." He paused. Then she spoke of her children. "And I began to see a life connected to other lives." His voice was quieter now. After that, killing her did not feel like taking one body. It felt like cutting through something larger. The king nodded slowly. The hunter continued, "When she returned, I understood something worse." The king waited. "I had believed that human beings stood above animals because we possessed reason and honor." The hunter looked toward the doe. "But she had more honor than I did." No one laughed. He said, "If I had killed her after that, would have had to admit that I possessed the stronger weapon, but not the better heart." The king looked at him for a long time. Then he turned to the court. "How many times," he asked, "have we confused power with worth?" No one answered. The king continued, "A man carries a bow and thinks himself greater than the deer because the deer cannot shoot back. A king commands soldiers and may think himself greater than the people because they must obey. A wealthy man may think himself greater than the poor because his house is larger." He looked around the hall. "But power proves only that we can act. It does not prove that the action is right." The elder minister who had spoken earlier bowed his head. The king looked again at the doe. "You came here prepared to die." "Yes." "You asked not only for yourself." "Yes." "Why?" The answer came gently. "Because once fear has touched your own heart, it becomes difficult to wish the same fear upon another." The king was silent. The doe continued, "When I was trapped, I knew what it meant to be helpless. When I thought of my children, I knew what it meant to fear separation. When the hunter released me, I knew what mercy felt like." She looked toward him. "So if I leave this palace and care only that I survived, then I have learned too little from what happened." The hunter's face tightened with emotion. The king lowered his gaze. For the first time, he understood that compassion was not simply pity. Pity looks at suffering from a distance. Compassion allows suffering to change what one does. He stood again. The hall straightened. The king spoke to his chief scribe. "Bring the royal seal." A stir passed through the court. The scribe hurried forward. The king continued, "Prepare an order." The doe watched. The hunter held his breath. The ministers waited. The king's voice carried through the hall. "From this day, throughout the lands under my rule, deer are not to be hunted for sport." Several officials exchanged glances. The king continued, "No royal hunt shall target them. No traps shall be set for them merely for amusement or profit where other means of livelihood exist." Where crops must be protected, non-lethal measures are to be used whenever reasonably possible. The scribe began writing. The king looked toward the gathered ministers. And anyone who ignores this order because he believes the suffering of an animal is beneath notice should remember why this decree exists. He pointed gently toward the mother deer. Because a creature without title, wealth, weapon, or human speech has taught this court what honor looks like. The hall was silent. Then the king turned to the hunter. You will not be punished. The hunter looked surprised. You showed mercy before you were commanded to. The king said. That matters. He continued, but I ask something of you. The hunter bowed. Anything, Majesty. Stop setting snares for deer. The hunter looked toward the doe. Then back at the king. I will. The king nodded. And teach others what happened. The hunter's eyes widened. Tell them I commanded it? No. The king shook his head. Tell them why. That answer changed the hunter more than the command itself. Rules can stop a hand. Understanding can change the hand that would have acted. The royal seal was pressed into wax. The decree was complete. But the king was not finished. He looked once more at the mother deer. You asked for mercy larger than your own life. His expression softened. So I will ask one thing in return. The doe waited. Go back to your children. For the first time since entering the palace, her entire body seemed to release a breath it had been holding. The king continued, and let them grow in a kingdom where their mother's promise was not wasted. The doe lowered her head deeply. Not to a master. Not to a conqueror. But to a man whose heart had been moved. Outside the palace, news had already begun to spread. A hunter had spared a deer. A deer had returned to die. And a king had changed the law because of it. Before sunset, the story would leave the palace walls. Soon it would reach the villages. Then the roads. Then the forests. And somewhere beneath quiet trees, 2 young fawns still waited for a mother they believed had disappeared forever. They did not yet know that she was coming home. The palace gates opened behind her. For the first time since entering the city, the mother deer stood beneath the open sky without wondering whether she would ever see the forest again. The hunter walked beside her. Not as captor. Not as master. Simply as a man who had witnessed something he would never forget. The city was still noisy. Carts rolled over stone. Vendors called from the roadside. Children ran between adults. But now, word had traveled ahead of them. People knew something had happened in the royal court. They had heard fragments. A deer had returned to a hunter. The king had listened. A new order had been written. When the doe passed through the streets, the crowd was different from before. No one laughed. Some bowed their heads. Some stepped aside quietly. Others simply watched. The mother deer did not understand every human gesture, but she understood enough. She felt no pride. Only urgency. Her children were waiting. The hunter noticed how often she looked toward the city gate. "You should go." The doe turned toward him. He pointed toward the road leading to the forest. "They need you more than the court does now." The doe lowered her head. "You changed my fate." The hunter shook his head. "No. You changed mine." For a moment, they stood without speaking. Then the doe turned and ran. This time, she ran toward life. Her wounded leg still hurt. Her body was exhausted. But hope moved through her more strongly than pain. The road from the city to the forest seemed shorter. Fields passed beside her. Farmers looked up. Children pointed. The doe did not stop. Soon cultivated land gave way to wild grass. Wild grass gave way to trees. And when the first familiar scent of the forest reached her, her pace quickened. She knew the path. She knew the spring. She knew the meadow. Most of all, she knew where she had left the two fawns. Yet as she came closer, fear returned. What if they had wandered? What if hunger had driven them away? What if a predator had found them? What if her lessons had come too late? The forest became silent around her. She reached the meadow. Empty. The doe froze. Her heart seemed to stop. She searched the grass. Nothing. She stepped toward the bushes. Still nothing. Then she heard a faint sound. A small cry. From the reeds. The doe turned. Two tiny heads appeared between the stems. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then the fawns recognized her. They burst from hiding. Their little legs carried them as fast as they could go. The first crashed against her chest. The second pressed into her side. The mother nearly fell beneath their excitement. She lowered herself and gathered them close. Again and again she licked their heads. The fawns cried. She cried with them. No hunter stood nearby. No knife waited. No promise called her away. For the first time since she had been trapped, the mother allowed herself to believe that she would remain. The first fawn kept touching her injured leg. The second pushed its nose beneath her neck as though making sure she could not disappear again. The doe stayed still. She let them cling. There are reunions that need no speech. The body itself remembers what absence felt like. The fawns had not understood why she left. They did not understand why she returned. But they knew this: she was here. That was enough. The mother stayed with them until their trembling stopped. Then she led them to water. They drank. She led them to grass. They ate. When evening came, the three rested beneath a tree. The fawns curled against her body. The doe remained awake for a long time. Above them, stars appeared one by one. She listened to the forest. It was the same forest. And yet it was not. Somewhere far away, the king's seal rested on a decree. Somewhere in the city, scribes were preparing copies. Somewhere along the roads, messengers would soon carry the order outward. The forest did not know this yet. The deer did not know. The hunters did not know. But change had already begun. The next morning, the mother led her young toward the larger grazing grounds. She hoped to find the herd. It took time. The great hunt had scattered them far across the country. Some had crossed rivers. Some had hidden in dense woodland. Some had joined smaller groups. The mother followed old tracks. She listened for distant calls. At last, near midday, she found several deer grazing at the edge of a valley. One older doe recognized her. She lifted her head sharply. The mother approached. Soon more deer gathered. The two fawns stayed close to her legs. The herd smelled the wound around her ankle. They noticed the strange scent of humans and city dust. The older doe asked, "Where have you been?" The mother looked at her children. Then she told them. She spoke of the trap, the hunter, the promise, the farewell, the road back, the palace, the king. The herd listened in silence. When she finished, an old stag said, "You returned?" "Yes." "After you were free?" "Yes." The stag stared at her. "Why?" The mother answered, "Because I had promised." Some of the younger deer seemed confused. One said, "But if the hunter had killed you, your fawns would have lost you forever." "I knew." "Then why risk it?" The mother looked at the two young beside her. "Because surviving is not the only thing a life teaches." The herd became quiet. The mother continued, "If I had run, my children might still have had a mother." She paused. "But the hunter would have learned never to trust mercy again. And I would have known that my final lesson to my children was that promises matter only when they are easy." The old stag lowered his head. The mother said, "I wanted them to live. More than I wanted anything. But I also wanted them to inherit a world where truth still meant something." The herd remained silent for a long time. Then the old doe stepped forward and gently touched noses with her. "You came back to us alive." Yes. And the king truly forbade the hunt? He did. Several deer looked toward the distant hills. They had heard royal horns before. They knew what those sounds meant. The idea that the hunts might stop seemed impossible. Almost dangerous to believe. The mother understood. Fear does not disappear the moment danger is removed. A body remembers. A herd remembers. For years, the sound of horses had meant panic. One decree could not erase that in a day. Still, hope had entered. Small. Cautious. Real. Over the following days, messengers reached the villages. Royal notices were read aloud in market squares. Officials informed hunters. Copies of the decree were posted near roads and forest boundaries. Some people welcomed the order. Some complained. Some laughed and said it would not last. Some hunters were angry. This is our livelihood. Others said, a king has too much softness in his heart. But then the story was told. Not only the law. The reason. A mother deer had begged to see her newborn young. A hunter had trusted her. She had returned. She had offered her life rather than break her word. The king had asked what she wanted. And she had asked for mercy beyond herself. The story traveled faster than the decree. People who would not remember legal language remembered the image of the mother walking back toward the knife. Farmers told it in fields. Travelers told it at wells. Merchants repeated it on roads. Parents told it to children at night. Each retelling changed small details. But the heart remained. A promise had been kept when breaking it would have been easy. And because of that, many lives had been spared. The hunter himself began visiting villages. At first, people mocked him. You were fooled by a deer. He answered, no. I was taught by one. That reply traveled too. He showed other hunters how to dismantle old snares. He helped farmers strengthen fences near fields. He began learning which animals could be driven away without killing. Some hunters listened. Others did not. But even resistance had to argue against a story everyone now knew. Months passed. The mother deer watched her fawns grow. Their legs became strong. Their steps became sure. They learned the paths she had shown them. They remembered the spring beneath the stones. They knew the reeds where stillness could hide them. The mother taught them more. How to move with the wind. How to recognize danger in silence. How to stay close to the herd. But one lesson she repeated more than all others. Do not think truth is valuable only when it costs nothing. The fawns did not yet understand completely. So she told them in simpler ways. If you say you will return, return. If you promise to help, help. If someone trusts you, do not make their trust foolish. The young listened. Years later, these words would remain. For now, they simply stayed beside her. And sometimes, when the morning dew covered the grass, the mother would watch the droplets shine in the early light. She remembered what she had told them on the day of farewell. Life is like dew. Beautiful. Fragile. Brief. But now she understood something more. The fact that dew disappears does not make its shining meaningless. The fact that life ends does not make how we live unimportant. If anything, impermanence makes each act more precious. A promise kept. A mercy given. A life spared. A lesson passed forward. These were small things. And yet sometimes, a kingdom could change because one small creature refused to make herself false. At first, the king's decree existed only as words. Words spoken in a hall. Words written by scribes. Words pressed beneath the royal seal. But a law becomes real only when it leaves the palace and enters ordinary life. So the king sent messengers in every direction. They rode toward villages near the forests, toward farming settlements, toward roads where hunters sold hides and meat, toward estates belonging to nobles who had long treated hunting as sport. In every place, the decree was read aloud. No deer is to be hunted for amusement. No royal hunt is to pursue them. Where conflict with crops arises, non-lethal means are to be used whenever possible. At first, many people listened with surprise. Some laughed. Some complained. Some thought the order would be forgotten within a season. Kings had issued many commands before. Not every command survived contact with habit. But this decree had something that most decrees did not. It had a story. And people remembered the story. A mother deer had been trapped. She had begged to see her newborn young. The hunter had released her. She had promised to return. And she had returned. Then, instead of begging only for herself, she had asked that the mercy given to her be extended to others. That part mattered. If the king had merely become fond of one deer, the story would have ended as an oddity. But the doe had refused to make her survival the center of everything. Because of that, the event became something larger. People began arguing about it. In markets. At wells. Beside cooking fires. At roadside inns. One farmer said, "A deer is still a deer. If it destroys my crops, will the king feed my children?" Another replied, "The decree does not say you must let the deer eat everything." A third said, "It says killing should not be the first answer." An old woman sitting nearby added, "Perhaps that is not such a bad lesson for people either." The men laughed. but not mockingly. They understood what she meant. The story began changing the way people spoke about animals. Not all at once. Not everywhere. But slowly. A boy who once threw stones at birds began thinking about the fawns waiting for their mother. A farmer who found a deer near his field shouted first, then remembered the decree and drove it away without reaching for a spear. A hunter dismantled one of his snares. Another refused. Then, a week later, he dismantled two. Change rarely arrives like thunder. More often, it comes like dawn. A little light. Then a little more. Until people realize the darkness is no longer complete. The hunter who had first trapped the doe became one of the most important carriers of the story. He traveled to settlements where other hunters knew him. At first, they mocked him. "You lost a deer and gained a sermon." One man laughed. Another asked, "Did the deer also teach you how to cook leaves?" The hunter did not become angry. He understood their pride. He had once shared it. So he told the story exactly as he remembered it. He described the mother's voice, her fear, her promise, the way she had returned. And then he said, "I am not telling you that hunger is unreal. I am not telling you that farmers do not need protection. I am telling you that I saw something that changed the way I hold a knife." That sentence silenced more people than argument would have. Because he was one of them. He knew their work. He knew the forest. He knew what it meant to kill. And he was not pretending that life had become simple. One young hunter asked, "So you will never hunt again?" The man thought, "I will never again pretend that killing is nothing." That answer spread. It was easier to accept than perfection. It was honest. Meanwhile, in the palace, the king faced resistance. Some nobles disliked the new restriction. They had grown up hunting. To them, the chase was part of rank, part of tradition, part of how men demonstrated courage. One noble said, "Majesty, if we stop every old custom because it causes suffering, soon nothing will remain." The king answered, "Then perhaps we should examine what deserves to remain." The noble stiffened. The king continued, "Tradition is not dishonored by questioning it. It is dishonored when we use its age as an excuse not to think." Another courtier said, "But hunting makes men strong." The king replied, "A horse can make a weak rider look fast. A weapon can make a fearful man look powerful. Strength is not proved merely because something weaker cannot resist you." No one answered. The king himself stopped joining deer hunts. This mattered more than the decree. People watch rulers more closely than they listen to them. If the king had banned something for others while continuing it privately, the law would have become hypocrisy. Instead, he changed his own behavior first. When nobles invited him to hunt deer, he refused. When foreign guests asked about the custom, he told them the story of the mother deer. Some were amused. Some were moved. Some thought the king had become sentimental. The king accepted all three reactions. He no longer needed everyone to agree immediately. He only needed the law to remain long enough for a new habit to become possible. In the villages nearest the forest, officials began helping farmers build fences from brushwood and stone. Children were sent to make noise at the edges of fields when herds approached. People learned where deer usually traveled. Some paths were left open so animals could move without crossing planted land. It was imperfect. There were still conflicts. There were still angry farmers. There were still animals killed. But fewer than before. And because fewer were killed, people began noticing something unexpected. The forests seemed calmer. Herds moved less chaotically. Young deer were seen more often beside their mothers. Travelers reported that animals no longer fled from every distant sound. One evening, the king rode outside the city without hunting equipment. Only a small group accompanied him. They traveled to the edge of the forest. There, across a wide field, he saw a herd of deer. They lifted their heads, watched, but did not immediately scatter. The king stopped his horse. For a long time, he said nothing. Then an old minister beside him spoke. "Majesty, once they would have run at the sight of us." The king nodded. "Perhaps they remember less fear." The minister looked at him. "Can animals remember mercy?" The king replied, "Perhaps not as we do." Then he looked across the field. But a world with less fear teaches every creature differently. The herd slowly returned to grazing. The king remained still. He thought of the mother deer. He wondered whether she was among them. He could not know, but somewhere beyond the field, she was alive. The two fawns were alive. That knowledge was enough. Back in the forest, the mother deer continued raising her young. The fawns were no longer helpless. They had grown taller. Their legs were strong. Their movements quick. They had begun wandering farther from her, though never so far that she could not see them. One afternoon, the first fawn found a narrow path leading toward a patch of sweeter grass. It stepped forward. The mother called it back. The young deer turned reluctantly. "Why?" "There may be traps." The words came automatically. Then the mother stopped. She looked at the ground. There had once been traps everywhere. Now, many had been removed. But memory moved more slowly than law. She walked toward the path and smelled the earth. No rope. No human scent. no hidden danger. She let the fawn pass. That small moment surprised her. For months, she had taught her children how to survive fear. Now she was learning how to live when some fear had become unnecessary. This, too, required wisdom. To remain cautious without remaining imprisoned. To remember danger without making danger the only thing one expects. The mother looked at her children. She realized that they were growing up in a forest already different from the one into which they had been born. Not safe. No forest is entirely safe. But gentler. And because it was gentler, they could spend more time learning things beyond escape. They learned play. They learned curiosity. They learned the shape of the seasons. They learned where flowers opened after rain. They learned how moonlight changed the grass. A life not constantly hunted has room to notice beauty. The mother understood this. And in the palace, the king began to understand something similar. Peace was not merely the absence of war. It was the reduction of needless fear. A kingdom could be quiet and still be cruel. Or it could become peaceful because those with power chose restraint. The decree protecting deer was only one law. But it changed the king's mind about many things. He began asking different questions. When taxes were collected, he asked who suffered most. When punishments were proposed, he asked whether correction was possible before severity. When disputes came before him, he listened longer. Some ministers praised him. Others complained that judgment had become slower. The king answered, "A slower decision is sometimes better than a fast injustice." The story of the deer had entered governance. Not as a rule for every problem, but as a reminder. Power should pause. Power should listen. Power should ask whether another life has been seen clearly enough. Years later, people would remember this period as a time when the kingdom became calmer. Not perfect. No kingdom is. There were still quarrels. Still hunger. Still storms. Still death. But something in public life softened. People gave more grain during hard seasons. Villages formed groups to help families after illness or fire. Hunters shared meat more often when hunting was necessary. Travelers began saying, "The king has changed." Others answered, "No. A deer changed the king." And those who knew the full story would add, "Only because a hunter first chose to trust her." That was the deeper truth. The story did not belong to one hero. The doe kept her promise. The hunter showed mercy. The king allowed himself to learn. Each act made the next possible. Compassion had moved from one life into another. Like a lamp lighting another lamp without losing its own flame. And because of that chain, two small fawns had not only kept their mother. They had inherited a kingdom learning, however slowly, to become kinder. Years passed. The two fawns were no longer small enough to hide beneath their mother's body. They had grown into strong young deer. Their legs were swift. Their senses were sharp. They knew the shape of the forest in every season. They knew where water remained during dry months. They knew the soft paths between thorn bushes. They knew which valleys filled with mist at dawn and which open fields were dangerous during storms. But there was one thing they knew more deeply than any path. They knew the story of their mother. At first, when they were very young, they understood only fragments. Mother had disappeared. Mother had returned. There had been a hunter. There had been a king. There had been a promise. As they grew older, the fragments became a whole story. One evening, beneath the shade of a great tree, they asked her to tell it again. The mother deer had told it many times. Still, she agreed. She spoke of the hunt, the panic, their birth, the trap, the hunter's knife, the plea, the promise, the farewell, the walk back, the palace, the decree. The two young deer listened carefully. When she finished, one of them asked, "Were you certain the hunter would spare you when you returned?" "No." "Were you certain the king would listen?" "No." "Were you certain we would still be alive when you came back?" "No." The young deer lowered its head. "Then you knew almost nothing." The mother smiled gently. "That is often how life is. We rarely know what will happen. We only know what kind of heart we wish to carry into what happens." The second young deer asked, "Did you ever regret returning?" The mother looked toward the grass. "Yes." The answer surprised them. "You regretted it?" "I regretted the pain it might cause you. I regretted that I had to leave. I regretted that I could not guarantee the future." She looked at them. But regret is not always proof that a decision was wrong. Sometimes a right decision still hurts. The young deer were quiet. This was not the kind of lesson they had expected. They had imagined goodness as something clean and easy. Choose what is right. Feel peace. But their mother taught them something more difficult. A good choice may still break your heart. A truthful choice may still frighten you. Compassion may still cost you something. Courage may still tremble. The first deer asked, "If the hunter had killed you, would your promise still have been worth keeping?" The mother did not answer immediately. The forest around them was calm. Birds moved high above. Light shifted through the branches. At last she said, "Yes." The young deer looked troubled. Even if no law had changed? Yes. Even if the king never heard? Yes. Even if no one remembered? Yes. The mother leaned closer. Do not confuse the result with the value of the act. They listened. If truth is good only when it brings reward, then it is bargaining. If compassion is good only when others praise it, then it is performance. If courage matters only when it succeeds, then fear will always decide what we do. She paused. A promise kept has value before anyone sees the result. The young deer became very still. The mother continued, what happened afterward was a gift. The hunter changed. The king changed. The kingdom changed. But none of those things were guaranteed. All I truly controlled was whether I returned. The first deer looked toward the distant hills. So the story is not really about the king. No. Not about the hunter. Not only. Not even about the law. No. The mother smiled. It is about what one life does when no one can force it to do the right thing. That sentence stayed with them. As the years moved on, both young deer faced moments of their own. Not dramatic moments. Not moments involving kings. Ordinary moments. And ordinary moments are where most character is formed. Once, one of them found a hidden patch of sweet fruit. It could have eaten everything alone. Instead, it returned to the herd and showed the others. Another time, the second deer saw an injured animal near a stream. The herd had already moved on. It hesitated. Staying behind was inconvenient. There might be danger. But it remembered its mother's words. If you promise to help, help. So it stayed until the wounded animal could move. These acts were small. No scribe recorded them. No king issued a decree because of them. But the mother noticed. She understood that values survive not by being praised, but by being repeated. The kingdom, too, continued to change. Children who had grown up hearing the deer's story became adults. Some became farmers. Some became merchants. Some became guards. Some became officials. They carried the story into different parts of life. A guard chose warning before punishment. A merchant returned money accidentally overpaid. A village leader kept his word to a poor family even after wealthier men pressured him. A young official refused to alter a record simply because a noble demanded it. When asked why, he said, "If a deer could return to a knife, surely I can return to the truth." The phrase became common. People said it when someone faced a difficult promise. They said, "Remember the deer." Sometimes the words were spoken seriously. Sometimes jokingly. But meaning lives even inside repetition. The story became part of the kingdom's moral language. And the king grew older. His hair turned gray. His movements slowed. He no longer rode as far as before. One day, he asked that the hunter be brought to the palace. The hunter had aged too. His shoulders were no longer as strong. He carried no bow. When he entered the hall, the king smiled. "We are both old now." The hunter bowed. "So it seems, Majesty. Do you still tell the story?" "Whenever someone will listen." The king laughed softly. "And when they will not?" "I tell it anyway." The king nodded. Then his expression became thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had refused to release her?" The hunter looked down. "Yes." "What do you imagine?" The hunter answered, "Would have killed a deer." The king waited. "That would have been all." A pause. "And because it would have seemed like only one ordinary death, would never have known what failed to happen afterward." The king understood. This was one of the strangest truths of compassion. We often see the immediate cost of mercy. We rarely see all the future's cruelty prevents. The hunter continued, "If I had killed her, there would have been no return. No story. No audience before you. No decree. Perhaps nothing in the kingdom would have changed." The king looked toward the open doors. "And all because of one moment beside a trap." "Yes." The king smiled faintly. History often hides inside small decisions. The hunter nodded. "Especially decisions nobody thinks matter." The king grew quiet. After some time, he said, "I have ruled many years. I have signed treaties, raised taxes, built roads, settled disputes, sent soldiers, received ambassadors." He looked at the hunter. "And yet people may remember me most because I listened to a deer." The hunter smiled. "There are worse things for a king to be remembered for." The king laughed. Then he became serious again. "I think the deer taught me something I should have learned much earlier." "What?" "That a ruler is not great because others fear his power. He is great when his power gives others less reason to fear." The hunter bowed his head. Outside the palace, the kingdom continued. Children played. Fields were harvested. Rain came and went. The forest changed with the seasons. And the mother deer grew older too. Her steps slowed. Her children, once helpless fawns, now often walked beside her to protect her. This reversal did not make her sad. It made her grateful. Once, she had shown them where the water was. Now they waited for her when the path became steep. Once, she had hidden them in reeds. Now they stood watch while she rested. Life had turned gently. One morning, The three stood beside the same kind of dew-covered grass she had once used to teach them about impermanence. The mother looked at the shining droplets. "Do you remember what I told you when you were small?" One answered, "That life is like morning dew." "And what does that mean?" "That it does not last." The mother nodded. The second deer added, "But that does not make it meaningless." The mother looked at them. "Yes." The sun rose higher. The dew began to disappear. The mother watched without sadness. She had once thought impermanence meant only separation. Now she understood something else. Because nothing lasts forever, goodness must be practiced now. Not someday. Now. A promise kept now. A kindness offered now. A fear restrained now. A truth spoken now. We do not possess endless time in which to become the person we mean to be. The young deer stood beside her. The morning brightened. And in the quiet forest, the lesson passed from one generation to the next. Not as a command. Not as a law. But as a way of living. Many more seasons passed. The kingdom continued to change beneath the same sun. Children became adults. Adults became elders. The king's hair turned white. The hunter's hands grew thin. The mother deer's steps slowed. And the two fawns who had once hidden beneath leaves became strong members of the herd. Nothing remained exactly as it had been. That was the nature of the world. The same law that carried flowers toward blooming also carried them toward falling. The same river that brought water to the fields never held the same water twice. The same body that learned to run one day learned, eventually, to rest. The mother deer understood this more deeply than she had when she was young. Once, impermanence had terrified her because it meant losing what she loved. Now she saw that impermanence was also what made love urgent. Because moments pass, they matter. Because a life does not last forever, what we do with it becomes precious. One evening, near the end of the dry season, the mother deer climbed slowly to a familiar hill. Her children walked beside her. The grass was pale. The sky had become amber. Far below, the forest stretched in long shadows. She stopped beneath an old tree. Her breathing was slower now. The two grown deer noticed. They remained close. One asked, "Are you tired?" "Yes." "Should we go back?" The mother looked across the valley. "No. Let us stay here a little." So they stayed. The sun lowered. A soft wind moved through the dry grass. For a long time, no one spoke. Then the mother said, "Do you know what frightened me most on the day I was trapped?" One of her children answered, "The hunter's knife." "No." "The thought of death?" "No." The mother smiled faintly. What frightened me most was leaving you before you knew how to live." The two deer lowered their heads. She continued, "I believe my duty was to teach you where water could be found, which plants to avoid, where to hide, how to follow the herd." She looked at them. "I thought that if I could teach you these things, then I had done what a mother must do." "Were you wrong?" "Not entirely." She paused. "But survival is only the beginning of living." The wind moved again. "What else is there?" The mother answered, "How you treat those weaker than you. How you behave when no one can punish you. What you do with another creature's trust. Whether fear becomes the ruler of your heart. And whether, when your life becomes difficult, you still recognize yourself." The young deer listened. The mother said, "I once thought I returned to the hunter because I had made a promise. That is true. But as I grew older, I understood that the promise was about more than words. It was about refusing to become someone else simply because I was afraid." The first deer asked, "What do you mean?" "When we are safe, it is easy to say what we value." The mother replied, "We say we believe in truth. We say we believe in kindness. We say we believe in loyalty." But danger asks a harder question. Do you still believe when belief has a cost? The two deer were silent. The mother looked toward the setting sun. "That is where character begins. Not in speeches. Not in praise. Not in rules carved on walls. But in the moment when a creature could abandon what it claims to value and no one would ever know." She continued, "If I had run away that day, perhaps no one would have blamed me." "You were protecting us," one child said. "Yes. And many would have said that was reason enough." She looked at them. "Perhaps they would even have been right to pity me. But I would still have known." The forest below was growing dark. One of the hardest things in life is that we cannot escape ourselves. We carry our choices inward. No distance is far enough to run from that. The first stars began appearing. The mother's voice softened. "But remember this too. Do not turn truth into cruelty." The young deer looked at her. Keeping a promise does not mean becoming hard. Duty without compassion can become pride. Truth without mercy can become a weapon. Courage without wisdom can become foolishness. She breathed slowly. "What happened to me mattered because mercy and truth met each other. The hunter trusted. I returned. The king listened. Each one alone would not have been enough." The two deer looked out over the valley. They understood now why their mother never spoke as though she alone had changed the kingdom. A chain is made of many links. Break one, and what follows may never happen. The mother continued, "Never think goodness belongs to one creature. It moves. one heart receives it, then carries it forward. Sometimes that is all we can do. The night deepened. At last, the mother stood. Her children moved beside her. They walked back slowly. In the months that followed, her strength declined. The herd adjusted its pace for her. The two grown deer stayed close. Sometimes she rested beside the spring she had once shown them as newborns. Sometimes she watched younger fawns play. She no longer feared the sight of young life as a reminder of what she might lose. Instead, she felt gratitude that life continued. Then, one cool morning, the mother did not rise with the herd. She lay beneath a tree while dawn entered the forest. Her children stood beside her. They knew. There was no hunter. No trap. No fear. Only time. The mother opened her eyes. She looked at them. Once, she had left them crying in a meadow. Now they stood beside her, strong and calm. She whispered, "You learned." One touched its nose to her face. "Because you taught us." The mother closed her eyes for a moment. Then opened them again. "No. Life taught all of us." The second deer asked, "Are you afraid?" She thought carefully. "A little." They moved closer. The mother smiled. Courage is not the absence of fear. The two deer recognized the words. "It is walking while fear walks beside you," one of them said. The mother's eyes softened. "Yes." A breeze passed through the leaves. Morning light touched the grass. Dew shone everywhere. The mother looked at it. Then she rested her head. Her breathing became slower, and before the sun had climbed high enough to erase the dew, the mother deer quietly died. The two grown deer remained beside her for a long time. The herd waited nearby. No one hurried them. Eventually, they stood. The forest continued. Birds called. Water moved. Wind passed through the grass. The world had not stopped. And yet something had ended. The two deer understood the lesson their mother had given them long ago. Everything that meets must one day part. They grieved. But grief did not destroy the meaning of what had been. Love had not failed because it ended in separation. A life had not failed because it ended in death. The value was in how it had been lived. Years later, the old king died too. The hunter died. New rulers came. New villages were built. Roads changed. Some laws were rewritten. But the story remained. People still told of the mother deer who had once walked freely back to the man who meant to kill her. Some remembered the decree. Some remembered the hunter. Some remembered only one sentence: she came back because she had promised. That was enough. The story passed through generations because it carried something larger than its details. It reminded people that truth matters most when breaking it would be easy. That compassion is real only when it changes behavior. That power becomes noble through restraint. That love is not weakened by duty. And that courage can tremble and still move forward. Long after the mother deer was gone, travelers passing through the kingdom sometimes heard elders say, "Do not make another's trust foolish." Children asked where the saying came from. And the story would begin again. There was once a mother deer. She had 2 newborn fawns. She fell into a hunter's trap. She begged to return to her young. The hunter released her. And after saying farewell, she came back. Not because she wished to die, but because she wished to remain true. And because she did, a hunter discovered mercy. A king discovered restraint. A kingdom discovered a gentler way to live. The deer herself eventually disappeared, as all living beings must. But the promise did not. It continued in every person who chose honesty over convenience. In every ruler who paused before using force. In every parent who taught by example. In every frightened heart that acted with courage anyway. Perhaps that is how some lives become larger than their bodies. Not by refusing death, but by leaving behind something death cannot easily erase. A way of seeing. A way of choosing. A way of remembering what matters. And so, when morning came to the old forests of that kingdom, dew still formed upon the grass. For a little while, each drop held the light. Then the sun rose. The droplets disappeared. But the light itself remained. And in that quiet image rested the final teaching of the mother deer: life is brief. Love is fragile. Promises can be costly. Yet a single truthful act, carried from heart to heart, may shine far longer than the life that first gave it form.